How's it going? Tyler here with Main and Tide, and this is just a quick video of a sauna build I did. The sauna itself is 8 feet by 12 feet overall, with 4 feet of that being a vestibule or change room area. Did this build over the course of a couple months in the winter to get it to the point where it was usable, and then took another good 6 to 8 months to actually finish it off and stop procrastinating. The sauna itself is just stick framed with typical SPF and sheeted with plywood. The size itself allowed for the minimum kind of an 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot room to make sure it was a big enough space to heat and have equal heat distribution. I'll touch base on a bit of the rest of the process as we go along, but for the rest of the time, enjoy. We were able to get the framing done pretty quickly here and get a lot of the building sheeted and get it closer to the point of lockup. Now, as per usual, when Sean and I tend to do projects together, the weather goes down the tube very quick, so the next step we had to focus on was getting the asphalt shingles onto the roof and getting this building a bit more waterproof. After we had the roof on, we turned to nailing off the rest of the plywood sheeting there, which I think both of us were regretting not having a nail gun at this point. Once we had the building wrap, the vapor barrier up on the sauna itself, I had to turn my attention to cutting the siding. I found a good deal on some large cedar 2x12s, and in the shop I was able to cut those down first on the table saw and then resaw those into beveled 6-inch siding on the big resaw bandsaw here. It ended up being a lot of work to do this and the alder siding, which we'll get to for the interior, but it ended up saving quite a bit of money and ended up being quite a good look that we're really happy with. We ended up shoshugi burning the outside of the cedar instead of doing a heavy finish on it. We'll likely come back and use a stain on it eventually, but for now it is up and good to go. Now, one of the best deals on this entire build that I was able to find was on this window, which was tempered. It was ordered for a new house build, but was sent with the wrong tint. So they replaced the panes in the frame itself and had this kicking around. So we just framed the end wall to fit accordingly. The backside of the sauna itself, we ended up using hardy plank on, as I had a bit of leftover material that was given to me from one of my in-laws' house renovations. This is the side that faces the hedge, so we thought having the slightly more durable material on that side wouldn't have been a bad idea at all. Minus getting the door on there, that pretty much wraps up the exterior portion of the build. The next step I tackled was just getting the insulation into the floor and the plywood sheeting down, and then framing out the interior wall here to divide the actual sauna and change room itself. Another part of the build that did save a bit of upfront cash but ended up taking a lot of time was building the doors and accessories on this build. The first one I'm starting with here is the exterior door, which I made out of some nice clear western red cedar. Switching gears here, and we're out of the shop and back into the sauna. Once I had the walls insulated, we came back with this rated foil vapor barrier, got it up on the walls, and then spent a fair bit of time going over all of the seams and making sure that this room itself was as watertight as I could make it to prevent any steam and moisture going into the framing and insulation. Put down backer board on the flooring, which is just going to act as the more durable substrate that I can put a bit of wood tile or duck board over top. The next step for me was putting up these lathing or spacer strips to keep the alder siding off of the vapor barrier itself, giving them a bit of room to breathe and shed off any moisture that they might accumulate during a sauna. This here was probably the most individual time-consuming step of the whole build, which was milling and shaping all of the alder siding. I got a good deal on this stuff that had actually been beside a fire. It hadn't actually gone through it, but it had some smoke damage and a bit of extra coloration because of that. With that being said, I had to joint and plane all sides, rip it in half, and then cut in a half-lap profile into each edge with a router. I was just using a brad nailer to get these on the wall. As you can probably see here, that little gap in the bottom left corner is going to be where the wood stove goes. And I was leaving that to put on some thicker cement board that will be a fire break between any flammable surfaces and the stove itself. Ended up using some 1-inch thick cement board in behind the stove, and behind that itself I was using some pieces of copper pipe to be an air gap space behind any flammable surfaces again. Once those were up, I trimmed it in with some more alder, leaving a bit of air gap between the boards and the trim. The next step from there, after I had the bulk of the siding up, was to frame in the upper bench. I just rough framed this in the shop and cut all the boards down to size, and once I had that installed and securely fastened to all the studs there in the wall, I came back and spaced the bench boards and attached them from the underside so there wasn't any visible fasteners. This might be a portion of the build I come back to and make adjustments to now that I've been using the sauna for about 6 to 8 months. The bottom foot bench was actually made pretty small and portable because my wife had talked about wanting to do some hot yoga or stretching in there with using just a little bit of heat and wanted the extra floor space, so we ended up doing a small bench, but I will likely go back and frame in a corner bench eventually here. While I am not necessarily an expert in all things sauna, most of my research really emphasized the importance of having good ventilation in the build itself. So this is one of 2 air vents in the sauna, this one acting as a heat dump and something where moisture can escape when you're done with your sauna session. And there is a similar vent down near where the wood stove is, as well as an air gap on the door that will eventually be installed between the 2 rooms here. The wood stove itself is another renovation find. This was a fireplace insert that had the metal surround included with it, and I was able to bend and modify that to make the rock basket to go on top, and it ended up being a perfect little size for the room here. This is the point in the build where I took a few months vacation once it was up and running and the stove was in, but we got back to it in the summer and got around to actually getting some of the plywood sheeting up in the change room itself, which proved to be a bit of a struggle by myself. One of the other additions we decided on was to make this an L bench on the top, so there's a bit more usable space and that 2 people could lay down if they so desired. You've likely seen me use it a few times throughout this build so far, but I'm just using some mineral oil to feed and nourish the alder wood here. One of the thoughts here in building the change room was to have possibly some firewood storage underneath the bench that I'm building here, and that's what we put that hardy board up for a bit of extra durability. We actually ended up finding a nice firewood ring, which you'll see further down the line, that lives inside the sauna itself. So I think it was a nice touch, and I actually don't mind how it looks aesthetically. After all the tedious trim work was done, we finally got to use it in its final glory on a beautiful rainy day in the fall. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Take care.